thanks for being here. We knew this wouldn't be a problem filling this room when we have Brian Felesky here. Sharon spoke a little bit about what legacy means, but it's really about lessons and people and values that shape an individual, not just their career. And I often chuckle, Brian, when somebody introduces themselves and says, you know, I'm a lawyer. I'm going, well, I actually kind of wanted to know some about you, not about what you do. And I think it's important that people realize that it isn't their career that's going to be, they're going to be remembered for. It's what they did and who they showed up for. And when I think about Brian, who came into my life full time 7 years ago, hard to believe, you know, we've had this journey of creating a startup, really, in what Intergen is today. And I've learned something from Brian every step of the way, sometimes fighting a little bit as we were doing that. But he loves bats, as Brian says. We're like an old married couple. But it really, you know, he said to me the other day, like, seriously, I learned something every day. He said to me the other day, you know, Sandi, don't you just hate when people set the table, but they never serve the meal? I went, like, how often does that happen in our lives? Everybody says they're going to do something, but they actually don't do it. Well, I have the luxury of knowing two guys that I have been involved with Intergen, Jim Gray and Brian Felesky, that serve the meal all the time, and they step up. And I'm really honored, Brian, to have this conversation with you today.
And Sandi, I'm very humbled. The audience, I can't believe so many people didn't have anything to do that they showed up this evening. Thank you so much for being here.
So Brian, we talk about the Alberta Advantage and what it means to be here and how it's different to do business here and what the DNA of Alberta is. And you talk a lot of times that it's that get-her-done attitude and people do handshake deals. Talk a little bit about what that means to be in Alberta and doing that.
Yeah, I think it's the good fortune of all of us to be in a province where there's an abundance of opportunity. You look over the landscape, through the clouds and through the sun, you can see opportunity. And our kids have enjoyed that opportunity. There's also so many people who are willing to lend a hand. And I've had the pleasure of standing on the shoulders of so many of you here and others. And you lifted me up, you kept me from falling. And it's often said, if you're standing on someone's shoulders, trying to maintain your balance, that builds connection and lasting friendship. So to all of you here whose on shoulders I've stood, I'm eternally grateful. When you talk about Alberta and its advantage, one of the things we all know about Alberta is creativity. But I would salute and underscore the grit of Albertans, the dogged tenacity and perseverance to put the ball in the basket, to use Jim Gray's expression. And as Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep on going. And that's what Albertans do. They keep on going. And I think Albertans understand, on a commercial basis, there isn't such a thing as an overnight success. Success in commerce, especially in our world of startups, growth companies, and developing companies, it's often late nights, abused credit cards, guilt of not spending as much time as you should spend with your family. But that's the cost, that's the price, that's the prize of grit and tenacity. And I've shared with others and students in the MBA program at U of C, where Bill Simbo and I had the honor of being Jaroslawski co-chairs. To those kids, those students, those graduates, that grit is the greatest determiner of success. It used to be, we all recalled, IQ was the measure. And then your social quotient. You had to have a social quotient. That was the measure. And now A professor in Pittsburgh University wrote a book called Grit, and she did an empirical study and determined without a doubt the most prevalent indicator of success, she says, in commerce, and it translates to success in life, is a sense of grit and determination. And if you don't mind, Sandi, I'll share a story with you that each of you have models and examples of what you're blown away by someone's grit. And still in my mind, in my heart, in the 1990s, a group of us determined that Alberta needed a domestic violence court. Domestic violence is different from all other crimes. It needs therapy, it needs a sense of coaching and huddling and recovery. And we made a valiant submission to the then Attorney General, and we got turned down. Then David Hancock became the successor. And so we marshaled our submission together again to go to Edmonton to submit and advocate for a domestic violence court. One of the vital leaders in our initiative was a guy called Jerry Salinger. He was the chief Crown prosecutor. But very sadly, Jerry developed a lethal lung condition. He was hospitalized, so he couldn't go to this pivotal meeting with the Attorney General, or so we thought. We were in that meeting when the doors to David Hancock's office opened up, and Jerry Salinger's wife pushed him in a gurney-like wheelchair. Took our breath away.
I'm sure it did.
And he was struggled to speak because his lung condition impeded his ability to speak. But he did.
So he wasn't going to let that stop the initiative that he works on.
That's right. The grit, Sandi. Exactly. And for him to get his butt out of the hospital, get on a gurney, get shoveled into their station wagon, laying on the back, and finally make his way into David Hancock's office. We hadn't made much of a submission by the time that Jerry Salinger made his emotional submission. David Hancock said, "I don't have to hear anything more. You got your court."
Yeah, that's awesome. Good, great story.
And sadly, the grit of Jerry Salinger ended about 3 months later when he died. But we memorialized him in a number of ways, golf tournament and so forth. But for each of you who've got models of grit in your mind, in the corporate community, in university, in social relationships, savor that and celebrate it, because, as Angela Duckworth said, it's the most prevalent predictor of success in life and in commerce.
And that's such a great story, Brian, because you just mentioned some of our founders that we work with, like a Brianne Everett or a Grant Sandin, that, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, had an idea they were going to do it. By them coming and listening to and meeting and understanding the experiences that our senior generation has had to help them understand, it wasn't easy for me either. We had to do this, just keep going, we can help you really with that. And that's why that transfer of knowledge, it says, hey, it wasn't easy for anyone, and if that guy can do it, if Jerry can come in on a gurney and make that happen, I should be able to do this too.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned Brianne Everett. She's a giant of modeling grit and determination. And I could go on, I just love her to bits. And she's proven that through tenacity, through perseverance, you can succeed. And she's doing that. And she's a model for all the students. She was, as Bill knows, MBA graduate from U of C after she took her med degree and after she determined the technology for censoring the lack of circulation for diabetic patients. And she's now got a contract with DVA in the United States for 35,000 sensors from Orpex. It's just
that 13-year overnight success. Forget
yeah, 13-year-old overnight success.
So where does grit come from? You grew up simple means, North Hill. You had a mom that was a single mom, and I mean, it was part of that. If you thought she can do it, I can do it. You've told me stories about law school and selling insurance and wanting to win.
Yeah.
Where does it come from, Brian?
Well, you're so right to mention my mother. My mother was a single mother. She had my sister and myself. All we could afford was a little wartime house in North Calgary. And that was my life and neighborhood. And my lifetime pals from William A. Hart School and then later Notre Dame College in hockey. Some people say, oh, you went to Notre Dame College. Were you a delinquent or a hockey player?
You say both.
I say I was both. But that whole phenomena of grit and giant dreams was modeled again by Per Murray. And the other thing I was mentioning in my notes, Sandy, that one of the prerequisite elements of achievement in life and in business, through all the wounds and defaults that I've encountered, is the imperative of celebrating everyone, regardless of their station or their position. And the people who have an amazing preeminence in my mind are those people who have the capacity to really lift up others who are substantially subordinate to them. I was on the board of Suncor for 9 years, and I learned from Rick George, rest in peace, and the leadership of that team, that when you're doing a strategic plan, you don't just gather the executives, you don't just gather the board. You go into the copy room and say, what the hell do you guys think we could do to improve this company? You go to the truck drivers up in Fort McMurray, what do you think we can do to improve this company? And the ideas and ingenuity and creativity that fomented and the team building that it created is something that I'll never forget. So the lesson of celebrating those who are from stations other than above you, but below you, and I hate that word saying below, but of a different station. And Calgary really is excellent in that regard. Many of you knew Pat, the shoe shine guy.
Oh, yeah.
Who shines shoes between the Suncor building, the Petro-Canada building, and Esso. And Pat ended up with kidney disease, and he had to have a kidney transplant. Well, Calgary, the hierarchy, the leaders of Calgary, headed up by Bill Mooney, and Bill Hay said, we got to do something for Pat. Let's have a cocktail party at the Pete Club, and people will throw money in the hat for Pat, a shoe shine guy.
Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget Pat standing there with his family in tears as we handed him a check for $175,000. I'll finish the story. When Bill Mooney died, and his dear wife Lois said, now, who do you think would be appropriate to give eulogies to you? And of course, there's people of high station, like Don Mazinkowski. And he said, Pat. And there was 850 people for a man that was almost 90 years of age. And the leading eulogy, without a doubt, was Pat's.
The shoe shine.
The shoe shine guy.
Yeah.
So I learned from Mooney, from Rick George, from Billy Hay, that always take the opportunity to celebrate others. And I don't want to take up too much of your time in this, but another thing, we had the privilege of acting for Husky, and John Lau was the CEO of Husky. And then Li Kai-shing separated himself from John Lau, and he went to Ashim Ghosh, who was a Vodafone guy in India. And Li Kai-shing said to Ashim Ghosh, I want you to go to Canada, to Calgary, to head up our oil company, Husky. And Ashim looked puzzled, and I don't know gas or oil from bananas. What are you talking about? Li Kai-shing said, I've watched you through Vodafone. You're a leader and you know people. And he gave the charge of heading up Husky to Ashim Ghosh. When Ashim Ghosh arrived in Calgary, he went up to the top floor where John Lau and his secretary and a number of empty offices were around for meetings. John Lau was the only guy on the top floor. Immediately, Ashim Ghosh said, I'm severing this top floor into many offices. We're going to have the whole damn executive team around me. I have to learn from them, and we have to act as a team. The culture of Husky changed in a moment because Ashim Ghosh recognized the talent of everybody, included them in the same office space and the same size office that he had. Just another example of, can I tell you one more?
Yes.
Jeff McCaig is here today, and it occurred to me when you talk about humility too, and how ingratiating that is. And never be proud for yourself, be proud for others and celebrate others. Bud McCaig made a hell of a contribution, a big contribution to the McCaig Bone and Joint facility at the university. And at his death, Cy Frank, who is an amazing orthopod, told the story of Bud McCaig being the founder of the Bone and Joint, who suffered excruciating arthritic pain, was seen to be in the lineup of all the patients waiting to get ushered in to see a doctor. And Cy said, Bud, what are you doing sitting there in excruciating pain? I will take you in. And reluctantly, Bud agreed to be taken in. And Cy said, Bud's was like walking on glass. The pain was so excruciating for him. But it signaled to everybody that Bud McCaig didn't want to buck the line because he contributed for the whole damn facility. He humbly suffered in pain for his appropriate turn.
And it never crossed his mind that he shouldn't do that.
Exactly. And as I look around to so many of the leaders in the room, you espouse that sense of humility and grace that just moves me to no end. And I tell you, many of you know that in the Petroleum Club, there was a tradition of going down into the basement and playing cards. Gin. Well, then the tradition developed, back to Mooney and Hay and these guys, that on Friday they go to St. Louis and they would call it the Linoleum Club. Because they had linoleum floors and so forth. And there was a bunch of gentlemen who were dependent and on the dole, and they became ingratiated by these guys in the linoleum club.
Yeah.
And if they needed their teeth fixed, they would pay for that. Or if someone happened to die, they would pay for their funeral and pay for their family to come to that funeral. And these coterie of fellas that were indigent became very important to the hierarchy of the oil and gas patch in Calgary. I mean, unbelievably, who went to the linoleum club. Fast forward, Bill Mooney, who is the head of City Service Canada, was elevated to be the head of City Service Europe. And the community said, we've got to have a going away party for Bill Mooney.
I know where this is going.
And you're exactly right, Sandy. And so they called for Bill to get a list of all the dignitaries that should be at this great celebration. And there was a great list. Black tie. Bill said, there's one group that you haven't listed, prominent, elegant gentlemen, and that's our pals from the linoleum club. So they sat up a table of 12. They rented tuxedos for them, likely got them washed and bathed and their hair cut. And I'll never forget when, I think it was the Governor General, was introducing the head table and the honorary guests. Bill Mooney said, excuse me, there are dignitaries that you haven't mentioned. And he had every one of those 12 guys, indigents, who they rented tuxedos for, stand up. Bill Mooney introduced them by name, where they were from. Wasn't a tear, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I'm sure. And that's Calgary. Celebrate people of all stations, regardless, because there's beauty in everyone. And
that's part of who you are today, because you spent those years with these giants that
did that.
Giving example.
Exactly.
I'm going to detour you just for a second here, because we're going to talk about, you became a lawyer.
Yeah.
And, you were never really acted like a lawyer, because you really were a deal maker, a strategist, a connector, which is one of the best things that you've ever, that you will be known for. But when did you realize that law wasn't going to be the end game, and that there were other things that you wanted to do and get involved in?
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah.
I love the law, and tax laws, many of you know, yeah. Art Corpash knows, and many of you others know, Bill Sembo knows. It's a very complex and very dynamic area. So the only way you can keep yourself, and Steve Allen knows, abreast is to constantly force yourself to teach the law school, to give papers, to be on panels, and be briefed on the dynamics of the changes that were happening day by day. And that was invigorating, inspiring, but in due course I came to realize that I didn't have the energy for those long study nights and delivering papers, being on panels, and teaching. And yet clients were under the misgiving that I was still sharp and on top of my game. And I wasn't, and I knew full well that if I continued practicing, I was fooling myself and I was fooling some of our wonderful clients. So I went into the investment banking business, and that was extraordinarily rewarding. I was going to do it part-time, and that part-time stuff.
Yeah, that didn't work out.
That didn't work out well. And I ended up, Steffi knows, and I worked 24/7 for 5 years for Credit Suisse, and ended up as deputy chairman. And it was a great experience, but again, it was hardly a move to retirement. But can I just say, and all of you in business know that integrity and the imperative of your word being your bond is vital, vital, vital. And no community is it more important than in Calgary. If you're not a person of your word, the community knows it immediately, and you're disenfranchised. If you are a person of your word, you are on Main Street, and you have a great community of people with you. And I've often thought that in the cremation of San McGee, where Robert Service says, "A promise made is a debt unpaid," how true that is. And let me give you, good people, a recent example of how your word is your bond was so personified in so many ways. Stan Grad, who's known to many of you, died 3 years ago. And one of the eulogists was Brad Hurtubise, who you all know was a great guy, a shitty skier, unbelievable skier.
You probably told him that.
Yeah. And Brad said, "I'm so honored to give this eulogy to Stan Grad because he personifies your word being your bond and your trust in your fellow man." He said, when Grad and Walker was going public, Rob Peters sent me over to do the due diligence over at Grad and Walker to get the detail. And one of the questions I had in my little spreadsheet was, what are the options of the employees? When do they vest, and what are the prices? And Stan looked at me strangely and he said, "If you want that information, go talk to the employees. They'll tell you what the hell they've got in terms of the number of options and the prices and the vesting date." Brad said, "This is strange." So he did. He went around to all the employees, documented what they all told him. Then he went back to Stan Grad and said, "Mr. Grad, this is what I've learned from the employees about the options and the details and the pricing and the vesting date." Stan said, "If that's what the employees told you, write it up."
So you say trust, not documents sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
trust, not documents. Yeah. It's a wonderful community. And if you'll allow me just to tell you, Billy Hay and Bill Mooney. Bill Hay was the head, as Larry Fichtner knows, of drilling services for Bow Valley. And Bill Mooney, as I said, he was the captain of the Blackhawks. Yeah, as Dan knows. And they would be at the Petroleum Club playing gin, and Bill would say to Bill, "Hey, I need 3 rigs in these formations on these days to drill these wells." And Bill Hay would say, "Well, I can do this number of rigs on these days," and so forth. And okay, handshake, deal, done. And in my experience with accountants who had the dreaded job of doing the audits on Bow Valley and the audits on city service, there was money moving back and forth from here to hell, and they would go into Mr. Mooney or Mr. Hay and say, "Excuse me, but there's payments for these rigs and so forth, and we don't have any documentation." No paperwork. And Bill Mooney would say, "Go talk to Billy Hay. He'll tell you what the deal is." And Bill Hay would say, "Mooney will tell you what the deal was." And so somehow, retroactively, they would make a deal, but it papered a promise made on a handshake in Calgary. And that is fantastic.
That's Calgary.
Daryl, you know all about that.
So let's talk about you and your be bold but mean it. I started this by saying a lot of people set the table but they never serve the meal.
Yeah.
You often say to me, Sandy, you know, where are we going? What are we doing? And you look at me and you go, be bold, Sandy. Think of anything that you think we can accomplish.
Yep.
Let's figure out how we can do it.
Yeah, be extreme. That's
And
right.
be crazy, be bold, just think outside. Don't let anyone tell you can't do
Yeah.
it. You've got good stories about great businesses that have been built
Yeah.
here on that vision of saying, let's just go for it.
Yeah, I was doing a celebration of Jerry Meyer, who was the head of TC Energy and who left us 4 years ago. And in the course of doing that, I researched the movement of TC Energy from Toronto, this vital crucible of Canadian commerce being moved from Toronto to the colonies of Western Canada. And the press expressed their vitriol about the audacity of Jerry Meyer and the TC board to move from Toronto, where all things important occurred, out to Western Canada. But when you say be bold, Jerry Meyer knew full well that 80 to 90% of TC Energy's business was in the West. And that's where the head office had to be. So he persevered, he showed grit, he realized the dream. And that dream led the way for Esso to come to Calgary, Shell to come to Calgary, Gulf to come to Calgary. And ultimately, I think it was in 1996, another heritage company of Canada, CP Holdings, had been in Montreal since 1885. And David O'Brien, following in the pathway of Jerry Meyer and his boldness, in 1996 said, we're moving CP Holdings to Calgary. And that CP Holdings, as you know, was the parent company for CP Ships, CP Coal, CP Hotels, CP Rail, and CP Energy. And again, he was vilified for doing that. But he did it again because it was the right thing to do. And he showed the courage of the right things to do. And I'll never forget, David said to all these employees that had moved from Toronto, all you have to do is stay here for 2 years, and if after 2 years you want to move back to Montreal, we'll move you back, relocate you, and terminate with a happy severance. And David always celebrated. There was only 3 employees after 2 years who chose to relocate back to Montreal. And he said, he annotates it, he says, and every one was for personal reasons, like an ailing mother, an ailing family, or whatever. And because the culture of this community that you've all built of doing the impossible and shooting the ball from center court into the basket. And when I just want to note to you that when David O'Brien moved CP to Calgary, he then continued to realize the grand dream, the grand mission of dividing CP into 5 companies rather than being a conglomerate. And again, how could you disturb this edifice of Canadian corporate culture and history? Well, he did it, and he did it in the year 2000. And Art, you'll recall that the value of holdings at that time was about 15 million. And after we split it up, and I say we generously, it was a $45 million conglomerate. Yeah. So he tripled the value by showing the mission, the dream, the imagination, and the
Not just doing it how it has always been done.
exactly, being a differentiator. And I have to annotate that for my humble career, to be in the international movement of CP and then the breaking it up into 5 companies, there wasn't a jurisdiction in the world that CP wasn't involved in, either through ships or hotels or through energy and so forth. So it was a very complicated transaction. It took about a year of my personal life and the support of such unbelievably brilliant people in our shop. But what an honor it was to work on that transaction and then do the split-ups and the mergers that took place afterwards.
And that's how business gets done. I mean, you know, someone has a big, bold vision, brings other people in who might say, do you know how complicated this is going to be, David, to actually make this thing happen? But then actually have them participate in it and learn how it can be done and hopefully walk away and do it again somewhere else. So that's really how that cycle continues to work.
Yeah, and Sandi, to your credit, and a number of the people in this room, if we go down a level from the giant transactions of Suncor and CP Rail, TransCanada and the like, to a lower but vital effort, and that is our startup companies, our growth companies, and our Schedule A companies and the like. It's so proud to recall the statistics. Alberta has now the highest rate of venture capital growth in the country. Last year, we raised over $700 million for companies at all different levels.
Based in Alberta.
Based in Alberta.
Yeah.
And Chen Fong, who's not with us today, but is ill, and we wish him well, was instrumental in forming Creative Destruction Labs, and particularly Creative Destruction Labs in Calgary. Creative Destruction Labs in Calgary, while there's Creative Destruction Labs across the country, in the US and in Europe, is by far the leading creative destruction lab organization in the whole complex. And just again footnoting about Calgary, Chen asked a bunch of us in the community, a number of the fellows who were there, to join him at the basement of La Chaumière, because he wanted to talk about bringing this creative platform to Calgary. But it was going to take $3 million to get it lifted off. And so he was asking the group there if they could find their way to either pay or commit to collectively $3 million. That night, after overtures from Chen and a dinner of an hour or an hour and a half or whatever it was, Chen raised the $3 million one night. And he said, I want you to know, collectively to all of us, that Vancouver has got a CDL. They're trying to raise $1,800,000. They're in the 3rd year trying to do it, and you people in Calgary did it in one night over a glass of wine and dinner.
And a handshake.
And a handshake.
Exactly. Great story. Well, let's talk about humor, Brian.
Okay.
You've been known to have a little bit of humor. You say that it's humor isn't social, it's commercial. And you know, you don't hear that very often, but like, what do you mean by that? And think about how you've been in a room where things are maybe just a little tense,
yeah.
And a good joke or a bit of humor can help move the transaction forward, let's say.
Yeah. Well, if we chuckle together, we can work together, and we play together. And I've seen that happen so often. And one of the experiences in my life, we were doing a large carve-out transaction, which is the time purchase of oil and gas from Texaco for the Karma group of companies. And the CFO of Texaco had this habit during the course of our negotiations. He'd slip off his shoes and he'd walk around the boardroom pontificating, and it was driving us crazy. So in the course of one of the meetings, when he's slipped off his shoes, I simulated going over to the telephone booth with his shoes in my hands and put them in the telephone booth. So the meeting ended with the necessity of another follow-up meeting to follow. And we're walking down the street, and the CFO comes running after us in his bare feet. Where the hell are my shoes? You guys stole my shoes. So then we explained to him where the hell his shoes were, and we had a collective laugh about his shoes being in the phone booth. And somehow the demeanor and context and feeling of our negotiations just changed. And it took the stress out of it all over stupid stealing of some shoes and hiding them, and him padding down the street in his socks. And so we did that very large carve-out for the Karma Group with Texaco, and Alan Norris and the Bruce Flatt and all the guys relished that story for a million years. It's still part of our folklore. And the other thing I have to talk about with good humor is back to Bill Mooney again. He was invited, as Anne McCaig knows, to be the MC at so many charitable events. When I had the honor of doing a eulogy for him, he did 85 charitable events. And not one word of profanity in his humor, whether it's for a charity or a men's group or whatever, came across Bill's lip. His humor was enjoyed by all. The only time he came close, so I remember he opened up a meeting and he said, as chair, "Fornication!" And everybody was totally taken back. He said, "I apologize for my pronunciation. I should have said, for an occasion." Like this. And he went on. And amazing. And I remember Doc Seaman, who's a Saskatchewan boy, the same as Bill was, and Doc Seaman played hockey for Father Murray. Doc Seaman got to the point where when he was establishing the date for a Bow Valley annual meeting and dinner, he would first call up Bill Mooney and say, "What's your availability?" Because he wanted
to make sure he was there.
He could be there so he could entertain the troops with his very good humor.
That's fantastic. I agree. Humor is a part of life and can certainly get you through a lot of different challenges. In this room, Jim Gray, we talk about never retire, just rewire. Brian, 82-year-old Brian, you're a living example of rewiring. I think the room is wondering, how do you stay so curious and how do you stay relevant today? What keeps you wanting to learn more?
Well, you've got Marjorie Zingle as an unbelievable, inspiring example. Jim Gray, Anne McCaig, you've got so many people here who every day are motivated to make a difference. And Marjorie Zingle, for many of you know or not know, is in her 91st year. She just sold her data storage company for $30 million. And she's engaged in starting a new one. And we're very proud to say that Margie Zingle is the pinnacle of a top 7 over 70 honoree, and we love her to death. And yeah, oh, yeah. And Jim Gray, he's insatiable, and he's addictive. You could go on and on and on, and Ann knows, and Paul Wanklin so loved Jim Gray, as we all do. But I'm just looking here at what he, most recently, of course, he stopped the green lines from being tunneled under the ground, which would have bankrupted the city of Calgary. And his tenacity and his sincerity and his research and his detail and the engineering support that he got changed that. So the government of Alberta said, we don't have any money for the Green Line if it involves underground tunnels. In addition, Josie died about 13 years ago, Jim? About 13 years ago, and she died of a diabetes disease. And Jim thought that was very debilitating. Well, he just didn't think about it. He said, we have to. As Josie said, if that's what you're thinking, what are you going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it?
And so Jim imported these chairs that provided exercise for people who were spending hours and hours every day in dialysis. And he found that that exercise and his great companion doctor, Dr. Mustafa, that people were better able to undergo a transplant if their body wasn't dissipated because of these exercise machines called the Josie machines.
Yeah.
And moreover, if the people did have a transplant and they continued this wellness program, they were better able to sustain the benefit of their transplant. That's not enough. In addition, Jim, remind me, I think it's 45 years for Alberta, for Calgary Academy?
Calgary Academy, Jim.
45 years?
Started in 1981.
Yeah,
81.
okay, 45 years. Jim Gray is still the chairman of Calgary Academy, an academy, a school that has international repute and reputation because his son, Ken, had some learning challenges, and there was no place in Calgary to deal with that challenge. And now thousands and thousands of kids have benefited from the special learning treatment and uplifting of Calgary Academy. And the number of, we were researching it, Jim, number of PhDs, professors, and people of great esteem and prominence who've graduated from Calgary Academy because of Jim Gray's bold idea a million years ago, and continues to be the chair of that board, is marvelous.
So really what you're saying, Brian, is that you can't retire. Jim's 92 now.
No,
So you're still learning from Jim on how to keep this thing going. And
Yeah.
That's how it works.
That's true. Well, in the midst of all the balls he's got in the air, here's this guy with a place at Harvey Heights, and he's in his 93rd year. There's all these establishments around Banff and Lake Louise and the Canmore corridor. They're oblivious to the fact that the likelihood, the certainty of a major fire in that corridor was about to happen, and it will make the Jasper fire pale in comparison. And who takes up the charge? Who gets all the experts involved? Who marshals the community together? Jim Gray.
Wakes up every morning
yeah.
with a schedule to say where his
Yeah.
meetings are and how he's going to do that.
And I say to Jim Gray, I can't stand one more project. I find myself
filled up. And so the final one is giving back.
Yeah, the final one is giving back, for sure.
Yeah. And the thing that we're all grateful for and a party of is sharing our good fortune and giving back. Michelle, your mom did that, and we honored her with such vigor. As you all know, and we know through United Way, that Calgary proudly has the highest volunteer rate in the country, and we have and we lead in donations per capita. So aren't those two incredibly lovely credentials? We have this army of volunteers, and we have this great giving. And the great thing about volunteering, so many of you, as you look around, you're friends with people here, not because of business relationships, but because of community relationships. We've given together, we share emotion together. And there's something about building those bridges through charity, through giving, that is so enriching for our life and for the community. And I think about so many giants. And let me just share, some of you will remember Tim Bancroft, who was the head of Shell. And he, when Steph and I were chairing the United Way campaign, he shared with us that Shell is all in on the United Way, both corporately and personally. And he said, when I came from England to Calgary, I wasn't greeted very friendly by the staff. I'm this English uppy-tuppy guy. Didn't relate to the oil patch people of Calgary. And so I was finding myself quite estranged. Happily, the United Way workday was in our calendar. And the people said, Tim, you've got to be a participant in the United Way workday. Well, what the hell are we going to do, Tim said. Well, we're going to go out and whitewash a bunch of fences. So he said, there I was, whitewashing fences. And we ended up with a whitewash paint fight with the team and the staff and so forth. I got whitewash all over my hair and all over my clothing, and a bunch of staff too, and there's a bunch of pictures taken of that. And he said, because I worked in the trenches of charity with the team at Shell, their regard for me changed entirely. And I think that's fantastic.
And that's part of what we want to share as we're passing this wisdom along, that, you know, Calgary was built because people did a lot of volunteerism and gave a lot to the community.
Yeah.
And we need to ensure that this next generation is understanding the importance of that, not just building their business here, but building the community that they live in and their children can live in and their grandchildren can live in.
Yeah, that's so true. Can I finish up?
I just want to move to family. Do you want to do something before?
Well, not another treasure of life, and I found this through our recent event where Steffi won't mind me mentioning that she had a stroke, is the bittersweet of life. And if life is going along swimmingly, and there's no sense of tragedy, there is also no opportunity to really deepen your relationships with your family and your dear friends. But if your barn is burning, or 2013 we had these horrible floods, and you have a gush of friends coming to help you, as Larry and Jan know, and so many others in the community know, we all joined hands together to help each other out of the burning barn and the floods and the tragedy. And the relationship building that occurred during that period of time, and the relationship building that I see people building through tragedy. And in our case, Steph's very, very busy in community work and board work and development work. And I'm fairly busy myself. And so to a large extent, our getting together was like two ships passing in the night. It was.
What meeting are you going to?
Yeah,
What function do
that's
you
right.
need to be
And we always talked about commerce and meetings and that type of thing. But when Steph had her stroke, I shut down a lot of stuff, and the world still continued. That disappointed me.
I know, it's amazing it's still happening.
And we spent a bunch of really intimate time together, not only as a husband and wife, but with our kids who really rallied. And I see that in so much adversity and come to celebrate it more intently and with greater wisdom and greater appreciation before. There's a great book some of you might want to get, and I've spread it around, by Susan Cain. It's called Bittersweet. And you've got a copy. And she reflects that Charles Darwin, who we all know, wrote the book, The Survival of the Fittest. And shortly after he completed the book and being celebrated for that book, he lost his daughter, 10 years of age, in a tragic accident. He was so fraught with grief that he couldn't even go to his own daughter's funeral. But he says that through that grief, he benefited so much kindness and so much love from his family, his friends, and the support. And then he took a different look at the animal world. And he said, if I was to write another book, having witnessed the animal life through the lens of care that's in the, I would have written a sequel called The Survival of the Kindest. And that's really stuck in our mind, that there is a sweet to the bitter. And sometimes we have to look for it a little deeper than we're inclined to do.
Or you thought you wanted to do even at
Yeah.
the time, right?
Many of you know the Humboldt tragedy of the Bronco group. I think it was 17 kids that were killed in that accident, and they were going back to Swift Current. One of the kids was a kid called Logan Boulay. And Logan Boulay, 16-year-old kid, had prescribed, for reasons that his parents still don't understand, that all his organs should be donated. And so they were by the Boulays. And they say that there were 7 to 8 people's lives were saved because of the vibrancy of his organs being donated to these donees. The sweet in the bitter of that tragedy for the Boulays is they started Green Shirt Day to celebrate organ donations and transplants. And this year, and they're on a committee that I'm involved with, but it just broke my heart that this year, Green Shirt Day had 50 million hits across the US and across Canada, and it resulted in 500,000 registrations for organ donations. So the sweetness and the bitter of that Bronco tragedy is reflected in the legacy of the Boulays remembering their son through organ donations and transplants.
Bittersweet indeed. Right?
Yeah.
Bittersweet indeed.
Just a little footnote. about the bittersweet, I'm reminded of a story that Warren Buffett had a long-standing bridge partner. And some long time after their bridge, his partner looked him in the eye. He said, "Warren, I love you. No, you'd hide me." And Warren looked puzzled and responded, "What do you mean, hide me?" And then his friend, who was a Holocaust survivor, talked about the people who, of course, hid Jews during the Holocaust at great peril and great risk to their own life to save another. And Warren was so taken by that adage and that reference that he said thereafter he would look in the eye of his friends and ask himself, would they hide me? And that's always sat with me as being a terribly fine reference about how dear friends, maybe a very, very small group of friends, can be there to support you through the bitter and be the sweet. And so for Warren, that test has stayed with many of us.
That is a fantastic line, Brian, just a fantastic line. So then let's lead into family, because friends and family, that means a lot to you. I think you once said that if you want to know who I really am, meet my family.
That's so true, Sandy. And in our case, meeting my family, Stephanie's family, is such a flattering experience for me, because they have become so accomplished, so caring, such strong character. And they've imbued that sense of character and caring in their children. And they have the blessing of spouses who are of the same nature. And so unequivocally, if you want to know who I am, meet my family, and I will be very flattered by that meeting. And the matriarch of the family, of course, is Stephanie, my dear spouse for a million years. She's clearly
Put up with you.
the epitome of tolerance and accommodation and understanding. And I just have infinite respect for her and her ability to manage so many plates in the air at the same time. Stephanie, as many of you know, served as vice chair of the whole Canada Lands development of Garrison Woods, a gigantic development. And there she was. And then she went on and is currently, just retired after 14 years, being the vice chairman of the Vienna University District Development, a gargantuan success and great compliment to the university, for the students, for the residents, and for the community. And while she's doing that, she's on various boards and community initiatives, and still has the time to make the best cookies in the whole world. If a child or a friend is in need, you can be rest assured she's there for her hamburger soup, which has become a famous. And I think there's a hell of a lot of friends and a hell of a lot of family are really faking their illness in order to get another portion of Stephanie's hamburger soup. As Auden described, and if I can borrow from him, I'd say, dear Stephanie is my north. She's my south. She's my east. She's my west. She is my life, my very best.
That's fantastic, Brian. That's absolutely fantastic. And I know how important the family has been during your last year. The grandkids have been there. The kids have been there. What do the grandkids call Steph, by the way?
The grandkids call her Kitty.
Kitty.
And they call her Kitty because Stephanie had a numerous of cats through the children's life. And it was just part of our domestic experience. And so when they were little kids, they want to see Kitty. And we weren't sure whether it was the cat they wanted to see or whether it was Steph they wanted to see. But in any event, Kitty became
That's what
Kitty.
they call her today.
That's right.
That's
and,
fantastic.
And so I had to get a moniker as well. And so I'm Popsky and Kitty.
Popsky and Kitty. Well,
yeah,
there.
exactly.
That's a great way to describe the family.
Yeah. And with all that, Sandy, I want to thank you again, thank the team, thank Ryan, and the privilege of working with you all is humbling and uplifting, and I'm very grateful. I'm one lucky bugger.
Right on, Brian. So Brian, we're getting to wrap time. So I now understand this has got to be a series, because like this is not good. We're not getting everything covered here in this one fell swoop. But behind us, the screen says Brian Felesky, a very lucky guy. Although you might have said a lucky bugger, I'm not sure.
I said lucky bugger.
I think we put guy on the screen, but you know, I think luck is attracted to those that deserve it. And do you want to talk a little bit about how you have been able to surround yourself with people that have lifted you up, and you therefore have allowed been able to lift other people?
I can't claim any credit. I think it's just such good fortune, so many mentors. When I was with John Ballum and Peter Lougheed for a while in the practice of law, then I went over to the vanity firm with the giants of law and practiced with them. And that was just good fortune.
And you're a sponge though, Brian. You take this in and you learn from those people, and that's just really important as people are building their careers.
Yeah, let me finish up because I know we're running it late. That I want to celebrate all of you good people, and I know most of you here, for everything you do to make this community what it is. And I just finished reading Art Korpash's book. Commend it to all of you. When I saw Art here tonight, I said, here, I'm just going to give a little address about my humble learnings, and you wrote a whole damn book.
Which I'm very impressed with. Getting words onto a paper, Art, congratulations.
Exactly. But let me conclude by referring to Winnie the Pooh when I talk about friendship and how dear it is. And Piglet said to Winnie, Winnie, we're such good friends. We'll be friends forever, won't we? And Winnie replied, no, we won't be friends forever. We'll be friends for longer than forever.
That's absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I started this by saying that I was really honored to be able to have this conversation with you. If Legacy Lessons is about what lasts, I think it's really clear that yours is built on grit, generosity, and the people you've lifted along the way.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate you in our lives, Brian.
Yeah, and let's give a hand to Sandy for her leadership in Intergen, and lifted it up, doing the impossible, the ground dreams. And Anna and Tony and Alex here do such a great job.
Yeah.
The people on our board that are here today, Barry is one of the tireless contributors.
Exactly.
And we are so damn lucky, and so thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. Brian Felesky.